All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Thursday. It's Thursday. My name is Jorge Acosta Palmer, and I'm the director of the Statewide Training Initiative. Thank you for joining us here today for navigating networking in uncertain times, adapting strategies for the post-pandemic era. Before I introduce our speaker, I do want to go through some quick housekeeping announcements. This training is being recorded. You're going to receive a copy of this recording in an email from Zoom within 24 hours. If you don't see that email, don't worry, just shoot me an email and I'll make sure you get access to the recording, that you get access to the materials that will be shared as well. As far as CLE goes, this is not a training that was approved by CLE. The bar doesn't approve networking trainings for CLE. Closed captionings are enabled for anybody who needs them. If you're having any issues with accessibility or the captions, you can also reach out to me directly. This training is being co-hosted by PILS. If you don't know what PILS is, that's the Public Interest Law section of the Florida Bar. And if you're not familiar with PILS, I highly encourage you to take a look at their website. I'll drop the link in the chat as well. They have a bunch of working groups and sections that they're pretty cool. One of them happens to be networking, and just joining Pills has been a great opportunity for me personally to do a lot of networking, meet a lot of other colleagues, professionals, and recruit speakers. So highly encourage you to take a look at Pills. As far as questions and answers, if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat or in the Q&A feature. If you want to ask a question anonymously, you can actually do that in the Q&A feature. We will try to hold the questions towards the end of the session. That way we keep the flow going. But if I see that there's a question pertaining to one of the slides that's being presented, I'll go ahead and just ask the question out loud. And before I introduce our speaker, if the slides that we're going to be using today, I'm going to upload those to the materials, which are also going to be sent out on that automatic email and included with the recording link. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Lindsay Griffiths. Uh, Lindsay is the powerhouse behind International Lawyers Network as its executive director. A global influencer and marketing maven, Lindsay thrives on building connections and crafting compelling content that leaves a lasting impact. Lindsay's accolades speak volumes, from being honored as a Thought Leader of the Year by the Legal Marketing Association of gracing Clio's list of legal luminaries. Her blog, Zen and the Art of Legal Networking, is a must-read for anyone in the legal arena, offering insightful perspectives on content and social media marketing. But there's more to Lindsay than her professional prowess. As a devoted dog mom to an elderly basset and rescue GSD, she balances her busy schedule with marathon running, globe trotting, and a fondness for collecting mugs. With Lindsay, it's not just about achieving success, it's about embracing life's adventures with passion and authenticity. Lindsay is also one of 32 authors included in the women's anthology, Own Your Own Story, Empower, Connect, Create, and Change. So without further ado, Lindsay, thank you for being here today and or speaking to us on this really great topic. So you're up.
Thank you for that incredible introduction, Jorge. I really appreciate it. Hello and welcome to everybody on this webinar. As Jorge mentioned, my name is Lindsay Griffiths, and I'm Executive Director for the International Lawyers Network, which is an association of mid-sized law firms that operates to create a global platform for the provision of legal services. I've been with the ILN for almost 20 years, and my role is to manage the day-to-day operations of the organization and develop strategies and implementation plans to achieve our goals. As he mentioned, I've also been the author for the award-winning Zen and the Art of Legal Networking blog for the last 15 years, where I write about topics from relationship and business development to leadership and client service. And today I get to speak to you about one of my favorite topics, and that is networking, specifically networking in these unique times that we find ourselves in. So we already know that the landscape of networking has shifted significantly due to the pandemic. There was already shifts towards working from home, the speed of technological advances, virtual meetings, etc. But the pandemic accelerated all of these and more at a rate that none of us saw coming or even thought was possible. And it's created some challenges and changes to the way that we work. But it's also created some significant opportunities, particularly in your case, in making the law more accessible to people who may not have had the same opportunities as others pre-pandemic. But at the same time, there may be some people who have far less accessibility. Because of the challenges and changes to the systems that we're operating in, it's important to adapt strategies to the current climate. So I generally tend to work with corporate law firms, and we know that lawyers tend to be risk-averse people. So the joke in the legal professional industry is that lawyers love to be first to be second. So none of the strategies that I'm going to talk about today is something that hasn't been tried by someone either in the legal industry or in another industry. So there are no new ideas. Let's jump into what we've got. There's one thing that I always start with, no matter who you are, and that is have a plan. It doesn't matter what kind of lawyer you are, what you want to achieve, what you've achieved so far, it always starts the same. The first thing that you want to do is figure out what your goals are, what you want to achieve. So let's talk about the kind of goals that you might be setting as legal aid attorneys. You may want to build relationships with other pro bono networks, connect with community partners, establish relationships with bar associations, network with government agencies, contribute to policy and advocacy groups, etc. For the purposes of today's presentation, let's pick one of those goals and use it as an example. We'll say that you're looking to connect with community partners. First, you want that goal to be measurable and achievable. Saying that you want, 10 new community partners in a month sounds awesome, and maybe it's possible, but is it really something that's doable when you have clients to manage and truly limited time and no budget? Probably not. So saying you want 5 new community partners this year, probably more doable and realistic. Then you can use that goal to help develop your overall plan. So having a written plan, I know, might sound a little silly, but it does actually help. This is something that I do. When you're so big, none of us has the time to have the energy to remember what you thought was a good idea 6 months ago. I mean, I certainly don't remember what I was doing in March. So if you have a plan that's written down, you can refer back to it on a monthly basis or even a semi-monthly basis, and it's going to help you stay on track to complete your goals. So here's a hot tip. Get yourself an accountability buddy. It's hard to do this work, especially when your paid work has to come first. So find somebody, maybe even here in the chat, who's willing to check in with you and vice versa every other month maybe, and see what progress you've made on your goals. It doesn't have to be that you've completed a whole goal. That might be something that's unrealistic. But finding somebody that who you have to tell, yes, I went to this event and I spoke to 3 key people, or I did some research and I identified the 2 magazines that I want to be featured in this fall, will be a huge motivator. Before you identify the tactics that you're going to use, you need to know where your audience is going to be. Your goals make this easy. And I'll talk about what I mean by the word tactics in a moment. So let's stay with our goal that we're looking for community partners. So where do those community partners hang out? Write it down. Obviously, we know that they're in the community, right? But do they also read local journals and magazines? Do they spend time in local Facebook groups? We all know the ones I mean. What kind of things do they find valuable? Where your audience is going to tell you a lot about where you should be and the kinds of activities you should be doing. And that's what I mean by tactics. When it comes to marketing tactics, that's really a fancy word for the activities that you're going to be doing to achieve your goals. So when we talk about this, it's really the way to sort of select out the things where you don't want to be investing your time. So you always hear things like people will get very excited about making Instagram reels. Well, if the people that you're looking to meet up with and get their attention, if they're not looking at Instagram reels, it doesn't make sense for you to be spending your time making Instagram reels. So that's why you want to figure out where your audience is. But it does make time for you, it does make sense for you to be spending time at your annual holiday parade, because if that's where your community leaders are going to be, then you want to be there too and connecting with them. So why do I say this? Because a hot new thing is always going to come along and everyone is going to get excited about it. And that's great. You can totally use that hot new thing for fun. Like if you want to be on TikTok and spending time there hanging out and doing research, or just, having fun for personal and social reasons, you should be there. But don't let anybody tell you that you have to be using it for marketing if that's not where the people that you want to reach are going to be. So here's a hot tip. Use social media when doing your research. Now, that may sound counterintuitive to what I just said, but here's what I mean. Even if you determine that your audience is not using social media, they're not hanging out there, they will be using it for personal reasons in the same way that you are. So if you're connecting with someone in person, whether it's for a meeting, at a networking event, or going to someone for funding or grants, look them up online. You can find a ton of information about people from their LinkedIn, their Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc. If you're the type of person, though, that becomes a rabbit hole for you, set a timer so that you only spend so much time on there, or you make sure that you're really being targeted about the reason that you're on that social media platform, and focus on the basics and see if you can find a reason to connect with that person on there, their hobbies, schools that they've attended, their pets, their children, you name it. And I promise you, it's not creepy. Everybody's doing it. So it is really just good research. Okay, now let's talk about your elevator speech. Honestly, I'm not even sure if this is something that anybody is really saying anymore, but um, we all do still need one. It sounds like nonsense, but I mean, a lot of us aren't even talking to anybody in an elevator anymore. But we, it is the thing that we say to people when they ask, what is it that you do? And I know probably all of you are saying, I'm a lawyer. Maybe you even say something a little more descriptive, like I'm a legal aid attorney, or even I'm a legal aid attorney in such and such county. But a truly effective elevator speech talks about who you help and how you help them. And why does that matter to all of you in a networking situation? Because you never know who you're talking to and when the person that you're talking to could introduce you to someone that can help you out. So before we talk about your personal elevator speech, let's think for a moment about every interaction that you have every day, in person, online, with products, services, etc. It numbers in at least the hundreds, if not the thousands, right? So think about the ones that are most memorable. Why do those really stand out? These days, unfortunately, it's usually because that was a negative experience or a really, really positive experience. So consider how, if you introduce yourself to someone in passing and you say, I'm a lawyer or I'm a legal aid attorney, how unfortunately that's not going to be that memorable. So ask yourself instead, what makes me worth talking about? You may be a great lawyer or even just a really good one, but plenty of people are really good lawyers. You may be here because you really want to help people, but I guarantee you that everybody who is here on this webinar is the same. So otherwise you'd be a really, otherwise all of you would be doing something else. So what makes you in particular stand out? That's the question that we want to answer. So you might start with something like, I'm a legal aid attorney dedicated to providing access to justice for those who can't afford it. I specialize in family law, housing issues, consumer rights, whatever it may be that is your particular area of expertise. My goal is to ensure that everyone has the legal support they need to navigate complex legal challenges. So if you focus on housing issues, maybe you say something like, I help protect people's homes by helping them to navigate complex legal challenges as a legal aid attorney. Or I ensure fair treatment at work as a legal aid attorney. When you're speaking with someone, If you have more time than it takes to give them only your elevator speech, you can also incorporate a brief story to help it make it more relatable or memorable. For example, instead of just saying, I help protect people's homes by navigating complex legal challenges, you could say, just last month, I helped a single mother keep her home after facing an unfair eviction notice, ensuring she and her children had a safe place to live. This personalizes your work and it resonates more with your audience in a way that also is not sharing confidential client information, because obviously that's not something that any of us want to be doing. And a hot tip here is that you don't want to just say these things in person. You also want to be saying them online, because this helps the right people find you. It tells your friends and family much more easily what it is that you do. And when you're trying to connect with the right people in terms of networking, getting funding, getting noticed, it's much easier to share your profile with the right people when it's clear who it is that you're helping. And one other thing when we're talking about this, storytelling is so important. And this is something I also talk about separately to networking, but storytelling is a way that we connect with people. It helps people understand in a way that we don't do in any other way, how what it is that we do connects them to what we do. So they can see themselves in what it is that we're doing. So when you talk about what you're doing in a way that is telling a story, so as I said, helping a single mother keep her home, some of the other things that you may be doing as an attorney, that's how people connect themselves with your story, and that's how it sticks with them much more clearly. So remember that scene in Love Actually when Hugh Grant tells us that love actually is all around? Well, I'm here to tell you that networking is too. It's not as romantic as love, but it's also all around. Networking happens everywhere, all the time. And at in-person events, yes, but also, spending time with the parents of your children's friends at sporting events, standing in line at the coffee shop, chatting about something you're passionate about on LinkedIn, hanging out at the park with other pet parents. Because of this, it's actually not a big scary thing that everybody thinks it is. There's ways to network that can make it more enjoyable if it's not high on your list of fun things to do. The thing that most people don't know about me is that I am an introvert. I hate networking, which is really funny because I do it a lot and I talk about it a lot, but I'm very anxious about it. I makes me very nervous. But because it happens all the time, it's a very natural thing for us to do. If you're not the type of person who wants to go to networking events, then find the thing that you're comfortable with and do networking there. That's totally fine. I'm not here to tell you that you have to change the type of person that you are. But if you are the kind of person that loves to go to networking events and meet people, then that's where you should be focusing your networking efforts. So find local events that are centered around the things you enjoy. Maybe you love running and you belong to a local run club. Do they know that you're an attorney? And even if they do, this is now the time to test out your new elevator speech on them. Let them know exactly the type of work that you do so that, you never know who it is that you're running with. Look into in-person or even virtual book clubs, cooking classes, maybe your political party, if that's something that you're passionate about. Between your local paper, yes, even your local paper, there are always lots of little events that are listed in there. You'll be surprised. And even LinkedIn, you may be able to find a great combination of virtual and in-person events that will unite your passions with networking. Never eat alone is another sort of old adage. As I mentioned, I'm an introvert, so this is not my favorite piece of advice, but it is a suggestion that comes up a lot. Even if you give yourself a goal of sort of forcing yourself to meet with someone for a meal, maybe twice a week or even a couple of times a month, this can be a great networking activity. Depending on your comfort level, maybe you do this in person or maybe you do it over Zoom. That's totally an option too. You look up law school classmates, local alums, other partners that legal partners, current referral sources. people you've met at networking events. Grow your group beyond the same people that you're always meeting and eating with. And you'll find your network expanding rapidly. And if you really want to grow it very quickly, ask the people that you're dining with to bring someone to eat with you that you've never met before. When you travel, whether it's for business or pleasure, take some time to add an extra day to your trips for networking. This is something that I always get a lot of pushback on, but it actually adds a lot of benefit to your trips. Meet up with friends that you haven't seen in a while. Reach out to your LinkedIn connections in that city. You would be surprised if you do a search on LinkedIn for people in the city that you're going to. You may not realize that people that you've known for a long time have moved. And they're now in the city that you're traveling to. Reach out to them and suggest that you meet up for coffee or a meal. That's a great way to, catch up, reaffirm those relationships, and just see what the other person is doing. It may not be that that person is directly going to be able to help you with the goals that you have set for yourself, but they may know somebody who can. And that's what the beauty of networking is. So have another hot tip. This is one that I love, and it's not that popular these days, but have a unique business card. Business cards are sort of waning in popularity, so having one at all can be a big deal. But my business card is square. So I'm always that lady with the square business card. It fits with our logo. We have a square logo, so the logo fits right on the business card. But it makes you more memorable. That's another thing that makes you memorable. And it's another talking point. So, if somebody has a bunch of, if they've gone to an event, they have a bunch of cards later, they pull out a card that's not the same shape as everything else, they're going to remember that you're the person that gave them that card that doesn't match with everything else that they have. And then my favorite thing to talk about, I'm an early adopter of social media. It's the role of social media in networking. Whether you're super confident with it or you think it's something that the kids use, it can supercharge your networking efforts. This is the reason that I love it, is that you can be doing other things that have nothing to do with social media, and social media is doing the work for you. So as I mentioned earlier, it's a tactic in your tool belt, and using it will depend on what your goals are. Again, it's only whether or not your audience is there. If nobody in your audience is using social media, then this is not a place that you need to be, unless it's for research purposes. So there are 8 opportunities that it presents for professional development and networking, and I would like to chat about those. And if any of them align with the goals that you're chasing, then add this to your list of tactics. So first, professional networking, using platforms like LinkedIn, which is the one that lawyers are still the most comfortable with, to connect with peers, join professional groups, and participate in discussions. Many platforms also enable you to follow with and engage with thought leaders, industry experts, and professional organizations so that you can stay updated with the latest trends, legal developments, and best practices. A hot tip is to follow relevant hashtags in the area that you care about, that your clients and potential clients care about, and especially anything in the goal area that you're focused on. Before we started, Jorge mentioned to me that sometimes people may be hesitant to use LinkedIn or update LinkedIn because it may indicate to your employers that you're looking for a new job. And I actually just experienced this myself recently, even though I've been in my role for almost 20 years. We just submitted for a sustainability project. And because of that, I had to suddenly do a whole bunch of certifications on LinkedIn. I took a whole bunch of LinkedIn courses. And I realized when I was doing it that it was going to look like I was prepping my profile on LinkedIn for recruiters. And so I had to tell my executive committee that I wasn't looking for a new job, that this was just part of the sustainability thing that we had all agreed to. So I understand that, updating your LinkedIn and certain things that you do on LinkedIn can definitely look like, you might be preparing your profile for for a new job. But I think if you use it regularly enough and you engage with people regularly enough, that your employers will feel more confident that that's not what you're looking to do, especially if you communicate with them regularly as well, that this is something that you're doing as part of your networking goals. And then if you are looking for a new job, they won't know that that's what you're doing. Just also as an aside. You can also use social media for client outreach and education by raising awareness. You can post educational content and maintain a social media presence, and that makes your services more accessible. If this is your goal, again, it's, as we've talked about, it's essential to understand where your audience is and utilize social media in the places where your clients will be seeking information. And that's not going to be LinkedIn. That may be, as I said, that may be the place where lawyers hang out, but I'm pretty sure that's not where your clients are going to be hanging out. We talked a little bit before about storytelling and that being a powerful way to connect with your audience on social media. So use that to share success stories, client testimonials, or your own journey in legal aid to build a deeper connection with your followers. Stories will make your posts more engaging and help your audience to understand what the real impact of your work is. It's Storytelling in legal is one of my favorite subjects, and I really could do an entire presentation. I have done entire presentations on only that. So I'm happy to connect further with you if you want to speak more on what storytelling in legal looks like. But it really is such a beautiful way to connect with people and show them what your work really is all about. It can also be used to promote causes, to advocate for policy changes, raise awareness for social justice causes, mobilize support for legal reforms, things like sharing petitions, organizing virtual events, and collaborating with advocacy groups. So depending on the type of work that you're doing and the types of goals that you want to achieve, this is another way that you can use social media to do that. Sharing, you can again use storytelling to do this. And that's a way to highlight the impact of the work that you're doing and build support. You can also build relationships through social media with the community, answering questions. Obviously, nothing that would, cause an ethical violation or provide, any sort of legal relationship. But you want to provide maybe some real-time updates about your own work and services, which can build trust and rapport. It's also a great place to promote workshops, legal clinics that you may be doing, and also community events that can reach a wider audience. And again, depending on the platform that you use, it will just depend on where your audience is hanging out. If you're looking to contribute to your own professional development, LinkedIn, as I mentioned before, for my own purposes on LinkedIn, they have access to webinars and online courses. And other attorneys are often sharing resources on there for that purposes as well. They will often share things like research papers, case studies, and toolkits for the wider legal community to have access to there. You may also be looking to do something like build your reputation. And by consistently sharing valuable content and engaging with other professionals online, you can build your own reputation as a thought leader. It's an opportunity to facilitate connections with potential legal professional nonprofits and community organizations that you may be looking to build connections with. So these are just a few of the things that you want to keep in mind when you're managing your social media. Some of these are obviously common sense. You want to maintain professional standards and confidentiality when you're engaging online. I'm sure all of you know that already. Things like having consistency when you're posting online, being responsive so that you're fostering engagement and trust, and things like using a mix of multimedia these days is really helpful. And doing things like, depending on your audience, you may want to do things like describe the media that you're using in the content and the comments of your post so that people who have, different abilities can have the ability to read what the picture looks like, those types of things, so that your content is engaging and accessible. Okay. So depending on your goals, there may be a few other ways that you can use social media to supercharge your networking events. Let's go back to our original example that we were discussing about connecting with community partners. So even if you're focused on engaging with those community partners in person, there are things that you can do to learn more about them through their social media. So you want to follow them on LinkedIn, and you can create a Google alert. This is one of my favorite things. I do this with my own clients. When we bring in a new member firm, I'll create a Google alert. So if there's any news about them in the media, I immediately know what it is. You can set it up so that it's either daily or weekly, so that you're immediately alerted if something happens with them in the news, and that can be really helpful. You can use LinkedIn to see if you may have any connections within the organization, and that gives you an opportunity to leverage those connections. We don't always realize that we're connected to somebody within an organization. As I said, a lot of times people will change positions, or they've moved places, and this, when you really go through your LinkedIn connections, it gives you the opportunity to see what you may not even know exists. If you're going to a networking event and you have access to the attendee list in advance, you want to connect to those key attendees before, and send a personalized note on LinkedIn to let them know why you're reaching out. But if you don't have advanced access to that list, definitely follow up with everyone that you've met at the event and reach out to them on LinkedIn, connect with them. And that enables you to stay in touch with the people that you've met at the event, to stay up to date on their news. And then what you want to make sure you're doing is commenting on future posts that they make, potentially sending them information that you've discussed, so that you can foster those relationships. And if they are in the same city as you, reach out and take those relationships offline. Not everything has to remain on the internet. To really stand out, consider developing your own thought leadership pieces on topics that interest you and that you find these companies are interested in. A great way to really leverage that is that if you're looking at those community leaders, especially, things that are being mentioned in the news, develop a thought leadership piece that mentions those community issues. Um, Put link to those community leaders and tag them, and then reach out to them afterwards, send them the thought leadership piece that you've written, and say, I'd really love to sit down and discuss this with you. And that's an opening for you to have that relationship with them, either have a phone call or a sit down meeting with them. So that's an opening that you're using those thought leadership pieces as a way to create that relationship or further that relationship with them. A quick note about this too. So you don't necessarily have to have your own blog. LinkedIn, I'm sure has this ability for you to write posts. So if you're not quite ready to create your own blog yet, you have the ability to create LinkedIn posts yourself. I do, and a lot of people will also advise you to have your own, what you would call sort of your own property. When the reason I say that is that anytime you create media on another platform like LinkedIn, like Facebook, Twitter, Threads, that media is technically owned by that platform. So if even though LinkedIn has been around relatively forever, technically it could go away at any time. So if you are writing articles on there, you want to make sure you periodically download them so that you still have them accessible to yourself. But eventually, if you are somebody who becomes a prolific writer on LinkedIn, you do eventually want to create your own blog so that you own that content yourself, and that content exists in a place where you have access to it. So that's just I always like to say, mention that if I'm going to advise people to write on LinkedIn. It's a great place to get started, but it's not a great place for your content to live in a long-term way. So back to our strategies. Observe where hashtags are being used with similar pieces and use those as part of your social shares. That's going to give people the ability who are using similar hashtags or following similar hashtags to find your pieces as well. You want to engage in follow-up discussion in the comments and replies, and potentially use that as discussion for follow-up pieces if that's something that you want to write as well. and really engage fully in these platforms. So in addition to engaging in that conversation in your posts that you're writing, and that's whether you're writing an article or if you post a comment on Facebook or post something on Threads, you want to share other posts of interest, particularly those within the area that you're concentrating on and things that may be of interest to the key contacts that you want to gain the attention of. And on LinkedIn, it would be great to if you identify like 2 to 3 groups that you may benefit from participating in and ask and answer questions in these groups, post comments, and really connect with those people. And that's a great way to develop content as well. And I never, people can get very excited about the groups that are on LinkedIn and really want to participate in a lot of them. And I find that, when you have a ton of connections and a ton of groups and a ton of pages, you end up never really seeing any meaningful content from any of them because your feed is just really way too full. And the way that any of these algorithms works is that you just see the ones that you interact the most with. So if there is something that you want to see more of, what you need to do is seek out that page, that person, that group, and interact more with it so that it's going to come up more naturally in your feed. And then you'll see more of that on a regular basis. So that's just the way that that's going to be true on any platform. That's just the way that that works. So let's talk about some key takeaways and how you might apply these to your own goals. So first, have a plan. The takeaway here is to always start with a clear, measurable goal and have a written plan. Consistent review and accountability are key to staying on track. So let's hear from the audience, and you can stick this in the chat. How do you think this might apply to your own goals? And feel free to drop this in the chat box. Next, know your audience. Understanding your target audience is where your target audience is and what they value will guide your networking tactics, ensuring you invest time and resources effectively. When thinking about your own goals, how do you plan to apply this takeaway to them? And where do you think your audiences are? So drop that in the chat as well. Think about what your own goals are and where you think your audiences are. And it doesn't have to be, I know we talked a lot about social media, but it doesn't have to be social media. Where do you think the audiences are that are going to get you to your ultimate goals? Creating an impactful elevator speech. Develop a concise and memorable elevator speech that highlights who you help and how you help them, making you more memorable in every interaction. And I would love it if someone is willing to take a shot. Remember when we were doing some example elevator speeches a few slides ago? Hopefully some of you were working on drafting your own, and I would love to see 1 or 2 of those in the chat. So think about your impactful elevator speech, what it is you do, and drop one of those in the chat. And then we talked about networking is everywhere. Networking opportunities are abundant in both formal and informal settings. That's one of my favorite things about them. Leverage every interaction, and again, I know that can sound icky. This is like, sales is everywhere, but I don't mean this in an icky way. You don't have to be like, how can I get the most out of every interaction with someone? I just mean that, you never know when you're talking to somebody that may know someone who knows somebody. So just keep in mind that anytime you're talking to someone, it could turn into a networking interaction. So always sort of keep that thought in the back of your mind. And what I also mean by that is that you don't have to just network at networking events. So if there are things that you enjoy doing, like book clubs, like running clubs, like cooking classes, things like that, that can be a networking event. You don't have to just go to in-person specific networking events to consider that to be networking. Anything that you enjoy doing can be considered a networking event. So if you have an idea for what might be considered a networking event, something I haven't mentioned, drop that in the chat too. Give other people in the chat ideas that have come up in your mind as we've been talking. I love hearing collective community thoughts on that. So if something's come up and you've thought about it, please drop that in the chat too. And then the next takeaway, one of my favorites, utilizing social media. Utilize social media to strategically enhance your professional presence, build relationships, and achieve your networking goals. Remember, as we said, to align your social media efforts with where your audience is spending their time. Which platforms do you think you will be focusing on, given what your specific goals are, and what are some ideas that you have for those platforms? Drop those in the chat. And then another takeaway, engage in continuous learning. Stay updated on trends and best practices through professional networks, online courses, and industry discussions. Continuous learning will keep you relevant and informed. Where are some places that you will seek continuous learning from, and how will this support the goals that you have set for yourself? And finally, be authentic and consistent. Consistency and authenticity in your interactions, both online and offline, build trust and establish you as a reliable professional. This can be especially challenging when you're a busy professional. I absolutely know that. So what are some of the ways that you can build in consistency, and share those in the chat to help your fellow attendees? So thank you so much for your time today. Oh, there we go. If anyone has any questions, I am happy to answer those now. And here is my contact information on the screen for anyone who would like to reach out. And I know Jorge is going to ask me some questions, and he's going to also provide the slides to everybody. So we do have some time for questions, which is great.
Great presentation, Lindsay. I feel like I need to go through my LinkedIn and really update it. I started to update it, but just kind of going through some of these features on LinkedIn specifically. In my position, it is really helpful to know all of this, particularly with the professional recruitment part. In my legal career, I've been involved in a lot of different aspects, whether it is doing outreach for the community that we serve, trying to recruit pro bono attorneys to serve. So all of these tips are really helpful in a lot of different contexts. So I've been trying to work on my elevator speech. Every time I get on it, I'm like, do I have enough time? Is it too long, too short? So I posted mine on the chat, but I've been tinkering with it. So I did want to add that if anybody wants to actually come off mute, they can raise their hand, they can drop it on the chat, and I can just bring you off mute if you want to share that way. If you want to share some experiences or anything that has happened before. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull up some questions that I had for Lindsay, but if anybody wants to chime in, go ahead. This is a good time to do so. All right, so let's see here.
I love your elevator speech. That's great. I'm just reading that. That's very cool.
There was one question that I specifically wanted to ask in relation to maybe, I mean, it's not part of the questions that I had in mind initially, but icebreakers, how to start the conversation. And I've used this card before, and it's you mentioned your square card, and I've sometimes been like, I don't even know how to get this conversation started. It seems like we're in a crowd where everybody knows each other. So I'm like, okay, let me pull out my not so normal card. So in my case, I use my digital card where I can either tap it. So I know we've discussed tapping phones where they share contact information, and sometimes that's just kind of an icebreaker. So do you have any like icebreaker tips that for these type of networking events?
Yeah, that's a great one. I mean, I've done so many conferences over the years, and it's really funny because it tends to always be the same sorts of thing, which is like the weather. And I mean, it depends for us, like we do them in different cities. So it always ends up being like, is this your first time in this city? And how was your trip in? That always ends up being those sorts of things. But I think a lot of times it leads into what your elevator speech is, which is, what do you do? How long have you been practicing? Um, so I'm trying to think if there's anything unique that people can ask, and that is, um, uh, I guess, maybe things like, it's just so funny because you always think like you want to be memorable and then you want to ask something unique, and it just in the moment it always comes out weird, like maybe things like, what's the best thing that happened to you today? Or but in the moment it always ends up being more like, how was the traffic? Or is this the first time you've come to this event? Um like, how long have you been doing X? Um, so I think, like, how do you know the organizer? Um, so I always find that like tying it into the event itself ends up being like the most effective true icebreaker. It is hard if you're coming into an event like we do. What I've found that we've ended up doing is that we've started putting into place like like a half hour first timers reception, where I still make our board of directors go. But something that allows people to come into an event where they're not walking into a wall of people that all know each other really well, because I understand that that is really uncomfortable. So when you do come into something and everybody seems to know each other really well, I find standing by the food helps, standing by the drinks helps, um, so that there's something that you can sort of be doing as opposed to just like being by the wall. Um, so the other thing I find that helps, if especially if you're an introvert like me, I find pairing with an extrovert helps. So if that's possible at all, find an extrovert, be their friend, and let them, like, they seem to be able to just like walk around and introduce themselves to people.
That kind of reminds me to I don't know if you've seen the show, but hey, this is Ted. Meet Ted, my friend Ted from it's kind of bringing a buddy with you, and it's always a great way to introduce yourself. And a friend, if you're an introvert, like I tend to be an introvert at times. I don't know, it depends on the day. Um, I did have a question here that I want to kind of throw out there. What are some of the key differences between traditional networking and networking in this current global environment? I know it feels like COVID was a thing of like 2020 and it's been forever. It feels like 35 years have passed, but it's only been four. But I don't know, what are some of those key differences given we have this new environment?
I think it's really interesting because it does feel like so much time is passing yet no time at all. And I think the key differences are, um, there's it's interesting because I think in some ways some people are very excited to like get back out there and they want things to go back to the way that they were. And then other people are really hesitant, and companies are also really hesitant to allow people to spend money and also be in person. And not so much be in person because they're worried about COVID, but it's more that we got used to this idea that we didn't have to be together. And so we got out of the habit of doing things in person. So now like a lot of things happen over Zoom, a lot, or Teams. And so it's like, can't we just do everything that way? Like, I don't want to leave my house at night. I'm tired. And so a lot of networking is happening that way too, which is fine. But we've gotten back to ourselves. Like, we used to do 4 conferences a year and now we just do 2. And we found that, excuse me, we found that there is still a deep importance in getting together in person. So I will say that if you can push yourself to do things in person, to network in person, you will find that there is no substitute for that. But it is hard to get over that mental hump. Like, we really have sort of formed these bubbles that we don't want to get out of. Um, and it's hard to get past that. Um, there is a big utility in networking online. However that happens, whether you're doing Zoom classes, Zoom, networking through social media, all of that has its utility. But we used to be very easily able to take those relationships offline, and now we're just not doing that in any sort of great fashion. But a lot of people will still not trust relationships unless they do face-to-face networking. And so I think there's still a lot of importance to be had for that.
I had another question that I think I'm guilty of doing this all the time. I will go to networking events, but I think one area that I need to improve is follow up. So, we do networking. So, can you give us any tips on how to maintain those meaningful connections?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think everyone's guilty of that because you feel like you've checked the box once you've done the event. And so in your mind it's really easy to sort of be like, okay, I did the thing, and I'm done with it. And so follow-up is really important. So one of the things I find for me is that even before I get there, I put a note in whatever calendar you find that you use to do that follow-up. So setting yourself up for success beforehand is really helpful, to say like, okay, I'm gonna, a couple days after I get back, I'm gonna review the attendee list. I'm going to follow up with at least like 3 to 5 people that I met there. Make sure like either that night or the next day, connect with those people on LinkedIn. And obviously, like sometimes you don't know what kind of follow-up is going to be needed, but that's why even if you put it in your calendar in advance, you then have the time to sort of sit down, do a debrief of yourself and say, like, that's right, I spoke to this person and I promised them an article that we both talked about, that we read, and I found interesting, that I thought I would follow up with them. Or, this person and I live in the same city and I like them so much, I thought we should meet for lunch next week. And so I'll send them an email and we'll find a time to get together. Or, all of these people I should be connected to on LinkedIn. And so let's just make sure I'm connected to them on LinkedIn. So, just doing that, making the time to have that debrief. And then even when you do that debrief, set up future appointments in your calendar to make sure that you continue those follow-ups is really important too. But at least before you go to the event, setting up that one appointment in your calendar to make sure you sit down and do the debrief will really help set you up for success.
I have some homework because I have some events coming up, and I'm hoping not to come back with a stack of cards and not following up. I'll make sure to follow this advice and follow up. And I'm looking at the chat. I don't see any questions, but again, if anybody wants to ask questions, within 24 hours you will get a copy of this recording, and I'll include a link to a folder with materials. I'll add the copy of the slides and any of the resources that we've discussed. I think everybody who's listening in or registered for this training should definitely look at their LinkedIn account. If they start updating it, just let your employer know. Don't freak out. I'm not leaving or whatever. I'm just following what Lindsay said. So
That's right.
I've just been looking at my own LinkedIn, and I'm like, wow, this like I wish I would have done this sooner. I would have been networking way more just by doing this. And it's funny because I've reconnected with some friends that I didn't even know were on LinkedIn. So
There you
I
go.
guess I don't see any other questions. I'm gonna drop some quick information here in the chat, but any final thoughts or closing statements, Lindsay?
If anybody thinks of any questions that they have that they don't want to ask, generally you are absolutely free to reach out to me privately. I'm happy to answer them. And I really appreciate everybody taking the time to participate in today's webinar.
Lindsay, thanks so much for being here today. This is a great webinar. It's going to be really helpful for us that need to do networking, do outreach, recruit, everything. So it's been really helpful. And thank you again for being here today. Have a great day, everybody.